Coin traders, how we doing? Thanks for joining me for the show. Looking at VeChain VET on that ticker. It is supply chain and all the chains for VeChain. Yes, it is a blockchain of all the things. Anyway, looking at this daily chart, actually not a pretty bad setup right now, especially given the rest of the crypto space and a lot of altcoin setups. This is actually a pretty good looking setup right now, especially given all the retracements that we have seen for the rest of crypto, specifically for altcoins right now. Did get a little bit of a run up and saw prices barely touching and kicking off of 5.25. So pulling back now even to the low of support at about 3.5, looking at a 36% pullback, which is actually really small and minimal for a lot of cryptos, since a lot of cryptos are in the 50% plus retracement level. So in addition to this, actually holding a very nice trend. So you can see this very nice trend line slightly sloping downward. That's okay, especially because we are kind of forming a little bit more of this longer term flag type pattern. So even if we do see this play out and actually get a very nice bull break from it, looking at a pretty decent target to the upside, which would actually have VeChain prices setting up right above the 7-cent mark. Now, if we actually want to flip over to the daily, a lot to talk about here first, because especially as we do look at a very nice Wyckoff pattern forming. So a very nice dip, big period of accumulation, small phase C, especially after breaking to this low, and then now looking like we're going to be forming our phase D sign of strength, and then a consolidation before a huge, nice phase E breakout once the market does start to return to a lot of normal levels. So kind of in this instance, looking left, basically a similar pattern to what we saw coming out of the COVID crash back in March of 2020. It's about the same time frame cycle, just shifted over to the left a little bit. So overall, big run up, pulling back, kicking off these EMAs for support, and then finally finding our run up to see this current all-time high right now, which we are going to be eyeing as an upside target at about 28.23 cents. So even from current prices at 3.79 cents, a run up to the current all-time high right now would lead us with over 650% gain, so an over 7.5x rally from here. Now, besides the Wyckoff accumulation, a lot of great things to say about this chart, specifically the weekly right now, and do want to focus a lot on it because as we had a very nice bullish cross on both the 12 over the 26 and then also these over the 50 period EMA, very nice bullish formation here now. And the thing that we always like seeing is a confirmation pulling back and having a very nice strong back test, which we actually got already, and what we are seeing again. So even if we do start to dip down a little bit lower to test the 26 or even potentially the 50, not necessarily the worst sign since we haven't done it just yet. Just had this little lower shadow here that did go in between the 12 and 26 EMAs. So that's why a test in this current range is not necessarily that bad, especially if we do defend it. And on top of that, we're looking at a lot of these support lines. So close for weeklies right now and coming in at 3.48. So zooming out, you can see how not a ton that actually kicked off of that. So we do have a pretty big zone forming right now, especially if we look all the way down to the lower level, about 3.1. That's going to be a much bigger target. So do have this very nice zone of downside support, and zooming back in, you can see how that does correlate to these exponential moving averages nicely between the 26 and 50. So yeah, once again, zooming out so you can see looking left, big period of resistance here before actually having a nice run up. And then in this instance as well, very nice back test and confirmation of not only this price level support zone, but also the EMA as support as well on this very nice run up to the all-time high for VeChain. Now, one thing about this weekly chart is that if we look at the bottom, just not really any volume coming in since the previous cycle. And we know that and obviously this is the Binance chart too, so it's not necessarily all of the volume for VeChain, but we know that especially being a big exchange, we're going to be seeing a lot come in. So to see this type of price action and chart movement with actually not as much volume as we saw in the last cycle, we're actually going to be expecting, and once that comes in, that's just going to hugely increase this price action and movement here, because with all of this price action so far and this minimal volume, we know that any sort of volume influx is going to have a drastic impact on the price, whether bullish or bearish. Realistically, we do think that does favor more of a bullish upside though. So zooming in a little bit more, just like we talked about, we are looking at a pretty nice flag type pattern forming here, especially after an extremely nice bullish candle. So even if we look at this bullish weekly candle and we talk about where current prices are, we're looking at about 2 months so far, and prices are only about halfway down the body of this bullish candle that came in for the weekly. So extremely good sign showing that 2 months worth just isn't enough for all of this impact. And the thing that's significant about it too is that if we do talk about volume, you can see that this big bullish candle wasn't even the peak amount of volume. So obviously, since this was the top, we did see a lot of selling as indicated by this big upper wick that did have a much bigger magnitude than the bullish body right now. So we do know a lot of selling pressure coming in. So a lot of the volume for this weekly was in fact bearish as well. Similar to the fact that this bearish candle also had a big upside wick as well as a big lower shadow, did form kind of more or less that spinning top type doji pattern. So we know that a lot of that is buying and selling pressure as well, especially given the fact that we saw an extremely small body, almost had this body flip bullish. So this could have actually ended up being a bullish volume bar. So that's why we can't rely specifically on it too much. We actually do have to reference the candle for that time period for that bar. Great thing about this weekly setup too is we're actually sitting very high above the previous weekly low. So we actually have a long way to go, especially since we have a lot of supports to the downside in order to actually break structure and change this trend on the weekly. So for example, price low, we actually would need to hold a low on top of 2.474 cents. But if we do look at the close, we would be looking at a close coming in right about 2.768. So plenty of downside support to actually maintain the structure. So even for the close, we still would be looking down about 26%. Not necessarily likely given the amount of pullback so far for the rest of the crypto, but obviously not impossible. And then down to the low, which actually would break all of these supports, including EMA and price level zone support, looking at a 34% pullback down to 2.5 cents from there as well. So don't necessarily think that's going to happen. We're more likely to see this flag pattern kind of play out, even testing potentially if we do see a little bit of a prolonged pullback down to in this zone before we actually take off again, or we could see a little bit more chop and some sideways action here sitting on top of this very nice 3.5 cent resistance, or excuse me, support level, previous resistance anyway. And so do want to pull up the technical indicators, RSI and stochastic RSI for now, had our nice big impacts and obviously this pullback. So we're looking at RSI actually being below the low for this pullback on the previous move. So that's actually kind of a nice sign because we do allow the RSI to cool down, yet still maintaining weekly structure, confirming these supports. And then by that point, we could be looking at a cross, especially if the stochastic RSIs roll over bullish and have this nice bullish cross, would be seeing a lot more pressure to the upside. RSI would probably start trending upside, especially after finding support. And then likely in the instance, we would be on our way back up to run up to that 7 cent target like we had talked about earlier. Now I want to flip here over into the 2-day, lost support on the 50-period EMA, but if we do look left, that actually happened on the previous pullback, and then we reclaimed it on the following candle. So we know that that's typically a good sign, especially if we lose it and can reclaim it, that does still confirm this level as a support for VeChain anyway, and for a lot of cryptos, especially in this chart. The next thing we want to look at is that we actually did have a little minor bearish cross on the 12 and 26, and then we actually saw a run up. So we are getting a little bit of a bearish cross right now. So if we do see a little bit more upside, we could actually see this tighten, confirm support on top of the 50 once again, and then have a very similar pattern where we do get stuck up before the next leg to the upside and the next breakout. So that's a very plausible pattern too that we do need to look out for. And that's why we do look at historical patterns as well and what has happened previously on the chart, especially in the current trend right now. Flipping over to the 4-day chart now, and do have VPVR volume profile visible range turned on just because I want to look at the current support level right now that is coming in, and that is been between the 26 and 50. So on the previous move as well, we can see that we did get some wicking down and a lower shadow into that zone. Had a little bit of a break of the 26, but more or less we are still finding support in between this zone as well. And did want to look at the VPVR because as we can see, volume's pretty minimal so far in this zone. But we can see a little blip and hump in this level right around the 3.55 cent level. So based on VPVR support, that is where we're also going to be looking at. And that does correlate with this price level of support as well. So we know that typically in a lot of these type of scenarios, especially when we see a quick run up and a quick retracement, this does provide a little bit more support, but it's not necessarily a strict support because we do get a little bit more of that zone just based on the price levels of, or excuse me, the price volumes coming in at all these different price levels for that support. So it's not necessarily going to be one price level or another, but when we do have these spikes, it does create a little bit more of that zone, just like what we're seeing out of the VPVR over here on the right anyway. But looking down below that, for example, if we do break that, then we would be looking to increasing a VPVR volume for support down to 3.1, and then obviously increasing all the way down to about 2.3 don't see that coming in, and we would expect this big zone to hold up, potentially even all the way down to the 2.78 to basically make that close, but do expect a higher low for that trend to be coming in before that and not being able to break the longer term chart structures. Now, did make a tweet here earlier about the crypto space just being down so much. So after 50% retracements in a lot of names, not necessarily financial advice, but if you are looking for opportunities to make entries in dollar cost average, this is kind of the setups that you look for once we do retrace this much, because typically we don't see retracements of 50% or more without thinking and knowing that a bottom is coming in here pretty soon. Especially this is large for given most bullish rallies right now that we see for this time period of a cycle, since typically we do see about 25 to 30, maybe even up to 40. So seeing this much of a retracement and pullback for altcoins, definitely great opportunities for dollar cost averaging. And one of the things I did note about it too is that if buying makes you sick, you know that you should be doing it, because we do want to be buying when people are fearful. So these type of patterns and opportunities, especially after such retracements, do end up being pretty good opportunities. So if you're not currently following me here over on Twitter or X, at @coin_trades is the handle. Definitely drop me a follow. Stay updated on messages like this. And yeah, looking forward to chatting with everyone here over on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. So back to VeChain right now, like we mentioned, great opportunities for downside supports to actually see some upside action, even if we do see some chop here in a little bit coming in. More or less though, overall, still just seeing a lot of sideways chop, especially like we talked about compared to a lot of cryptos pulling back overall. And obviously this is pretty volatile for a sideways chop action coming in, especially since like we talked about, most of this move is about 30% or so, 26. Yeah, so pretty good actually overall, even though it is kind of a big swing wild ride, but we know that this pattern overall is still pretty good considering a lot of charts have just been pulling back. So yeah, with that actually is going to go ahead and wrap up the show on VeChain and upcoming and what we're expecting for this chart setup and the crypto space right now. Hopefully you all enjoyed. If you did, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you have not done so just yet, so you can stay updated on all types of crypto content like this. Do appreciate all the continued love and support. It does mean so much. Don't forget to drop me a follow, or excuse me, a comment down in the comment sections below. Prices, disagreements, predictions, all that stuff. Do love getting back to each and every one of you. All right, yeah, that's going to take it out for now, though. So stay safe, take care, everyone, and I'll catch you back in the next video.